first off is House Bill 1855 by Representative Bernstine, Markey's Law, and I'd like to invite Representative Bernstine to come up, and you have the floor. You can make what comments you have, and there will be introductions as well. Representative Bernstine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity that you've provided me to speak here today before your committee as well as members. Thank you for the opportunity. We have House Bill 1855, which is named Markey's Law. And Markey's Law is a piece of legislation that was that's named after Markey Mason. And this legislation is of a young man that was brutally stabbed to death. He was 8 years old. There was an individual that was in jail for 20 to 40 years for murder. This individual, I'm not going to state his name because we're not going to give him that publicity, but this individual then was released at the minimum sentence. He committed numerous violent offenses while in prison. These were violent offenses against corrections officers as well as violent offenses against other inmates. This was a man that should have never, ever been on the street. Our legislation has been worked on, and we really tried to find a resolution for this so it never happens to another family. And we worked with many individuals, including Tom Dimmick. Thank you, Tom, for your assistance on this. Lawrence County District Attorney, Josh Lamacusa, as well as the District Attorneys Association, the Corrections Officers Labor Union. Nick Karen, my Chief of Staff, was instrumental in this, and also Markey's family. And I have Markey's family here today, who is spending some time with us. And we're going to meet with several people, including the governor and the Speaker of the House later today. So I just wanted to recognize them real quick. Thank you so much. If you could just raise your hand. Thank you so much for having the courage to be here today. It means a great deal to us, me, as well as the rest of the members. House Bill 1855, to explain what it does, and as we all know, we have numerous criminal justice issues that go on here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but there's a significant difference between those that are violent offenders and those that commit crimes also while in prison. Our legislation would postpone the consideration of a violent inmate's parole an additional 24 months from their minimum release date for each conviction of a violent offense while in prison. In addition, it would postpone consideration of an inmate's parole for an additional 12 months if an inmate attempts to escape, smuggles in contraband, retaliates, or intimidates witnesses while incarcerated. I'm happy to take any questions on this particular legislation, and once again, Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity and the members for giving me the opportunity to discuss this very important bill.
Thank you, Representative. Council Smith, if you have anything to add.
I just wanted to note that there is one agreed to technical amendment to clarify language of this bill.
Okay. Yes, this is an agreed to technical amendment, A03867 by Representative Zabel, and a motion to adopt that amendment by Chairman Briggs, and seconded by Representative Knowles. Are there any questions on the amendment? Any negative votes on the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is unanimously added. Now a motion to report out House Bill 1855 as amended.
Mr. Chair, I did have some questions.
Yeah, I will get to you. First, we're going to have the motion. The motion to report out House Bill 1855 by Representative Mahalik and seconded by Representative Delosier. And questions or comments on the bill as amended? you're in order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry to jump on you. Yeah, I had a couple questions.
Yes, Representative.
Retroactivity. So how is the application of your bill going to, what is your intention for those who are already serving sentences and have been sentenced under one parole schematic versus what your bill is proposing to do?
Yeah, so the intention with this, and feel free to jump in with counsel if I'm incorrect on this, but it would be if the individual does not commit a crime, so we're not going to go retro if they've committed the crime while in prison, but this would be if they've committed the crime while in prison, that they would be held responsible for that.
Okay, and I apologize. Let me rephrase it.
Sure.
So, okay, I'm imagining that when a person has been incarcerated and maybe 2 years ago committed one of these offenses, your bill would not apply to them because their offense occurred beforehand, right?
Yeah, that it would be with the conviction of the offense. Is that correct?
This legislation doesn't actually state anything about retroactivity. There are some cases that would probably be on point here. I think it would only be on individual sentence going forward, and not current sentences.
Okay, so thank you, counsel. So if I understand then, this would be applicable to those who are newly sentenced as of the effective date of this bill, if it becomes law.
Yeah, and that would be the sentence of the conviction while incarcerated. So, for example, somebody committed a crime and they've been in jail for 15, let's say they get 15 to 30 years. They're 10 years into their sentence, or 5 years into their sentence, okay? And then 2 years from now, they commit a crime while in prison, that would be applicable for them.
Okay, and I apologize again for it. The question I'm trying to get at is that your bill, if I understand it, would be amending, in essence, parole time for those who have already been sentenced, right? So if I was sentenced to 5 to 10 2 years ago, I'm 5 to 10 and I'll be up on my minimum in a couple of years, right? So
Correct.
What I'm trying to say is not the new offense, but the existing offense. Is it that those who are currently serving, who were sentenced on an underlying offense before the effective date of this bill, that it will apply to them? Or is it that you'd have to have a new offense and newly incarcerated, and then it would apply for a parole change to them?
It would apply to the individuals that are currently in jail today, but I would recommend that they behave themselves like normal citizens and choose not to commit violent crimes while in prison.
Representative Schemmel?
Yeah,
More?
I did
I'll
that.
come back to you.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if Representative Miller had completed his question.
Go ahead, Representative Schemmel. I'll go back to Representative Miller. He
Very good.
tends to
Thank
take a
you.
long time, so we'll go back to him.
As I read the language of the bill, it says an inmate who commits, which is present and future tense, so it should not apply to someone who had already committed an incarceration a violent act. It should only apply to those going forward after passage and execution by the governor of the bill. And in regard to sentencing, Representative Miller, I think I understand your concerns. However, I would think that when a judge is sentencing, they're not going to be looking at the potential for future offenses in terms of the way they sentence. So I don't know why it wouldn't apply to individuals already incarcerated. As this committee well knows, I'm not a fan of mandatory minimums of any kind. This, however, I find is distinct from that insofar as it applies to parole for individuals that are already incarcerated. So I find a distinction there. I support the bill, and I think the language is fairly clear in regard to whom it applies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative.
Representative Miller?
I'm sorry. Thank you, and I think counsel was clarifying something for me, so I appreciate that. Just so I understand, just your thought on this. Some of your offenses, I mean, obviously, you have a lot here. Let's assume, did you give any thought, just consideration, to somebody who was doing, 10 years for something? They end up in their first year getting convicted of an indecent assault.
Yes.
With roughly 9 years left until they were brought up, right? So they were doing some hard time with it. Any concern or thoughts as to whether or not this thing here, especially if it stacks on top of each other, might be a disincentive for people as they go through to find a positive path and stay on it?
Yeah, thank you, Representative, for the question. I appreciate you bringing that up because that was actually one of the things that we spoke at length with those stakeholders, particularly the labor union for the corrections officers. And what they've seen is the following, where individuals are currently, they'll go into prison, okay, and they may get 10 to 20 years. We'll use that as an example, with the intent of getting out at 10 years with good behavior and doing the right things. Those 10 to 20 years is supposed to be if you do the right things, then you're out at the right time, okay? But what they've seen a lot is these corrections officers it's misbehavior, it's poor decision-making, it's violent offenses that often happen early on in that sentence because they know that they will not be held accountable. So what we're saying here is that these individuals will be held accountable for their actions. And, in society, I don't know that we always do, but we should be a society that holds people accountable for their behaviors and their actions. If somebody commits a crime without question, they should be held accountable for that. So, in fact, we did have those conversations, and that's why we chose to go with this route.
Representative Zabel.
I just wanted to, I am a supporter of this bill for some of the distinctions that Representative Schemmel made, but I want to make it very clear that any attempt to apply this retroactively would be flat out unconstitutional. And I encourage any prosecutors who are looking at this law down the line to understand if you apply this retroactively, it is unconstitutional to do so.
Thank you, Representative. Our intention is to not make it retro, as it talks about future crimes that are committed and convictions while incarcerated.
Any other questions or comments? Representative Toohill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, so like any other crime that's committed, the defendant would then have the ability to put forward a defense if it was in defense of themselves, that there was an assault or some sort of physical altercation, you would be able to put forth a defense, correct?
Yeah, thank you, Representative. This would be a conviction. That is correct. So it would be the regular proceedings. This crime just happened to be committed while incarcerated or while in prison rather than on the street. So those inmates have those same rights as the individuals on the outside. That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Representative Lozier.
Thank you. Real quick. When we are talking about probation or parole and a sentence is given 10 to 20, at the time of sentencing, does the judge at that particular time say that you will be paroled in 10 years?
Not necessarily, Representative. And what we've seen is, though, that many of those individuals are paroled at that minimum date.
And when they are paroled at that minimum date, it is due to the issue of evaluating the first 10 years of that particular person's activity behind bars, correct? Because they are looked at whether or not they have good behavior, whether or not something else has occurred. So an evaluation is given at the 10-year point by the parole board, correct? They take many things into consideration.
Representative, yeah. So I think that while that is the intention, that is, from what we've found in this particular instance, is not always what happens in practice.
Okay.
For example, the parole board in this particular circumstance did not seem to be notified that the individual that committed the act against Marky Mason was in solitary confinement for an extremely long period of time. The numerous violent offenses did not seem to be brought to the attention of those that then were asked to determine whether or not the inmate should be paroled. So, for example, those are typically sent to the district attorney. the president judge, they are not informed of all the actions. Now, while that's an entire other big case of worms that I think I look forward to working on and hopefully working with this committee to solve. In principle, yes, that is how it is supposed to work. In practice, unfortunately, it does not.
Okay, and when I'm thinking it from the perspective of that at 10 years, an evaluation is given of whether or not this individual has behaved well. I think that this bill will allow for also the balance, and it should be considered the fact that when someone has behaved well, absolutely, we should be looking for the ways to allow them to be paroled and be able to be out and part of the society. If in fact that they did not have good behavior, I believe that that is only fair that they be held accountable, not only for their good behavior, but they also should be held accountable for their bad behavior. And if someone is in prison and having violent offenses against them, I would believe that that should be balanced just as much as good behavior. So I don't see where it's part of a sentence that happened 10 years prior. I believe that it is an evaluation that happens after 10 years of action by an individual. They happen to be in prison, but both the good and the bad should be taken into consideration. So I appreciate that you're pulling this forward, because the victims of a crime deserve to be able to not only speak at those particular hearings, but also have the ability that that person has not been able to recognize that they need to get on a better path in 10 years. Coming out into our society is probably not the best thing for them at that time. So I thank you for the bill.
Thank you, Representative.
Any other questions or comments? I specifically want to thank the family of Markey for being here today. I had the opportunity to meet with them prior to this meeting, and I appreciate you using the brutal and tragic death of Markey for good to try to make change in the Commonwealth. Specifically, Markey's little brother Matthew is here today, who's 7-year-old, a brave 7-year-old little boy who unfortunately witnessed part of the crime, but was a brave little boy who ran 3/4 of a mile at 11 o'clock at night to get help. Extraordinary testament to his bravery, and I think he's going to be quite a young man in life. I can't wait to see what happens with him, because I think there's a lot in store for him, and hopefully he can use this for great positive. So thank you for being here today. It's been moved and seconded that House Bill 1855 be reported as amended. Would the secretary please call the roll?
Chairman Kaufman.
Yes.
Delozer. Yes. Dowling.
Yes.
Ecker.
Proxy, yes.
Hershey.
Yes.
Joswiak.
Yes.
Plunk.
Yes.
Knowles.
Yes.
Mihalik.
Yes.
Nesbitt.
Yes.
Schemmel.
Yes.
Stevens. Toohill.
Yes.
Topper.
Proxy, yes.
Walsh.
Yes.
Chairman Briggs.
No.
Bizarro.
Yes.
Davis.
Yes.
Dawkins.
Proxy, no.
Lee.
No.
Miller.
No.
Mullery.
Proxy, yes.
Rab.
No.
Schusterman.
Yes.
Zabel.
Yes.
House Bill 1855 is reported as amended.